Welcome back to the Talking Point, ladies and gentlemen. Of course, there's only one thing we can talk about at the moment. It is the hottest topic. It is the only talking point. It's about Chelsea and Graham Potter, and obviously what manager can come in to the club. We've already touched upon that. I'm sure we'll also touch upon that later on. We haven't really spoken a lot about Graham Potter and his time at Stamford Bridge. He's obviously left now after just 7 to 8 months, not even a full year there. I want to kick things off quite quickly, lads. Pat, was it the right decision to sack Graham Potter?
If it wasn't the right decision, it was still a completely justifiable decision. I think the fans at this point had kind of had enough. There was no real evidence that the team was getting much better. And this season's basically gone. So what do you do at this point? Well, you try and maximise your chances of having a successful year next year. And that might mean getting rid of this manager so you can think about the guy who comes in next. Right now, target-rich environment, Todd Bowley, checkbook out. I think it's a hard one to argue against.
I feel like that's where everybody is kind of at the moment. You do feel sorry for him, that's for sure. McCubbs, do you also agree that it was the right decision? And do you think he would have ever got it back to possibly being the right decision to sign him in the first place?
I mean, we'll never know, will we? This is the thing. He was signed on a 5-year contract, and when you give a manager that kind of contract, you know that there's definitely an understanding there that they will allow you to get things wrong. The problem is, I don't think Bowley and the wider ownership really considered that things would go so wrong for Chelsea this season that despite £600 million worth or whatever it is, more or less worth of investment, was going to lead to a potential bottom half finish. I mean, it is really catastrophic in that sense, and is is more of a result of the club's about the decisions being made higher up rather than anything that Graham Potter has done wrong necessarily. Any manager going into that situation was going to have a tough time in terms of gelling a squad. We've seen the reports about players having to get changed in the corridors of the training ground and stuff because there's just so many players. It's a huge, massively bloated squad. But back to what you were saying, I mean, it was always a bit confusing, wasn't it? It was like, under Abramovich, Potter would have been gone probably in January or February latest, wouldn't he? Under Burley, we thought, who knows, maybe he will actually stick alongside him. But even then, I think if results hadn't improved by early next season, then it would have had to, the business decision would have just come in, wouldn't it? Like, you can't spend that much on a squad and have a manager who, doesn't even look anywhere near kind of getting that squad to European qualification. So in answer to that, I think the writing was on the wall. I think it didn't look like this squad was, like Pat was saying, was really improving. Although, having said that, I think the Villa game, probably a little bit of a harsh one to sack him after. That was probably one of Chelsea's actually better home performances in recent weeks, despite the results. So many glaring misses in that match, especially from Mudryk, Kante later on. Ben Chilwell, I'm not sure his goal should have been chalked off personally. But anyway, I think it was the correct decision, and I think it didn't seem like his kind of managerial reign there was that salvageable.
For sure. I mean, there's definitely a host of reasons for why it could happen. One that I find quite interesting is the fact that Julian Nagelsmann has suddenly become available. But do you think there was anything in the fact that because he is now available to hire, that maybe they thought, obviously Spurs are managerless at the moment as well. There are rumours that he was going to be talking to Tottenham Hotspur, and they thought this is a guy who, again, apparently, and this is what they always reiterate, is that they're very keen on having this long-term project, this long-term manager. They believe that in Graham Potter by giving him a 5-year deal. Obviously, that's what Nagelsmann kind of has, seeing how young he is as well and how ambitious he is as well. Do you think maybe because he was available, because that does seem like who they're going to be going after. There is also rumours of Luis Enrique, Amorim, so on and so forth. But do you think maybe because he was about, they thought, maybe if we can get him, this is the time to call it?
Well, as young managers go, guys you can build a project around, he's probably the best guy there is. So I can understand that a little bit, because I suppose when I was talking about managers available before, now I think about it, a lot of those guys are kind of more established problem solvers. Maybe Ancelotti becomes available this summer, but Zidane, Enrique, these are guys who are going to figure out what you've got going on with the team, maybe ask for some high-profile, big-budget signings, they're not guys who you'd expect to be there for 5 years developing this and turning it into more of a dynasty. Yeah, I think whenever you're thinking about firing a manager, there are two things to think about. Does the manager deserve to be fired? Is there a better option on the market? And this is the rare case, I think, where both things line up. So yeah, I probably would go straight for Nagelsmann, but if you don't get him, then you start to get into serious trouble.
That is
Well, I mean, well, at that point, you do think, like, there are lots of managers who Chelsea have run through. Like, you look around Europe right now, and you're like, there are 2 ex-Chelsea managers competing for top 4 in Italy, in Sarri and Mourinho. You've got Ancelotti at Real Madrid, and then you've got, in the Premier League, these are Chelsea managers who've been sacked this season. Potter, Tuchel, Conte, Lampard. I feel like there might be another one, but they just kind of keep going. So at this point, you've actually got a very limited pool of guys who you can go for. Nagelsmann is a very rare opportunity, and I think if I were him, I would maybe not want to come straight in, but he's essentially Potter with a more impressive CV, right? He's already managed a team full of, superstars. He's won a title. It feels like all the stars align on this one.
One of the biggest talking points, McCubbs, about the kind of sacking for Potter, and it's interesting considering when you talk about Nagelsmann and his time at Bayern Munich, is Potter, there's been this word about he's not a Chelsea man. He's not somebody who obviously was maybe going into press conferences like the history of Chelsea's managers, of your Jose Mourinho's, your Thomas Tuchel's, Antonio Conte's, Carlo Ancelotti's, who kind of had that presence about them, I think, in the press room. We then also saw the clip of the Champions League. Let's go in the Champions League as well. That got leaked. And supposedly he was well liked by the players. But do you think that actually had a big impact at all?
I think it has an impact on the fans' view of him, and by the Villa game, there were anti-Potter chants, being sung around Stamford Bridge. So, it does have that effect. Yeah, within the dressing room, I'm not so sure. I think the thing is about being a very likeable man, as Graham Potter clearly is. I would be surprised if there was ever a proper dressing room revolt against him in his career, because he is so likeable. Football players aren't, heartless people. How can you really revolt against, someone who clearly cares so much, on a personal level about the players, and also I'm sure the Chelsea players completely understand that he was given a really, really tough job. Half of that squad were bedding in themselves this season. Let alone, expecting, a manager to produce results straight away. So, I think, the report, as the reports kind of are intimating, is that, there was a lack of confidence in him, but he was always going to be, I think, liked on a personal level. And I think it's more so his reaction to kind of questions about him in the press and whatnot. Like you say, that comment that he made about the Champions League, just seemed very out of character. At least his public-facing self, it seemed pretty out of character, and I think that did show to an extent.
And it was a private event. Yeah, it was a private event.
That's true. But nevertheless, he's still speaking to a large group of people. I think maybe his reaction to that, and he was quite defensive in press conferences when he was questioned about that, and it's obviously tough. And I think actually his answer to those questions, when his passion, not being angry and whatnot, was brought up, which is kind of silly stuff, to be honest. I think he did kind of give a good account for himself, but I think that's the first time in his career that he'll have been really questioned in that manner. And I think this kind of what it boils down to, at least in terms of Graham Potter, is that he had, especially at Östersunds and Brighton, he had 2 jobs where he, firstly at Östersunds he obviously transformed the club, and then at Brighton he was given, he was given a lot of chances to get things right, and the transfer policy behind him was a lot more considered, a lot more slow burn. You got the impression that what he was doing at the club really informed the decision making there, rather than at Chelsea, where he's having to react to a lot of the decision making that's been made above him. 7 new players suddenly coming in January. I'm sure he was pretty happy with some of those signings, but there's no way that he was, dictating, all 7 of those transfers. So yeah, I think it all ties into that, into a manager who was in a pretty alien situation to what he was used to before. And I think, ultimately the pressure did show with that. Like, it did feel a little bit Moyes at Man United towards the end. It did. Like, even if behind the scenes things weren't, going mad, there was still the impression that that he was a little bit out of his depth.
There are similarities, not necessarily exactly, because the two levels at the clubs I think are completely different, but the way how I guess Moyes came in after Ferguson, I think one of the issues that I kind of mentioned on Monday's video is that I thought Graham Potter from day one was already 2 steps behind, because everybody was still, or a lot of fans were still very disappointed in the Thomas Tuchel sacking and not understanding why that happened. And then for Graham Potter, it kind of happened when Thomas Tuchel took over from Frank Lampard, and people obviously, it was his club legend, and Thomas Tuchel did such a good job in the end actually to convince him. Helps when you go on to win the Champions League, that's for sure. But with Potter, his like the results straight after were still not we're winning. It's actually we're just about moving along, getting a lot of draws, and then obviously the results that happened. Okay, Pat. Now I do want to ask as well about this, because there were reports that have come out obviously since the sacking, and I will say actually, considering when you've looked at other things, there wasn't anything too surprising in these reports about something behind the scenes or big bust-ups with players or anything like that. Actually seems quite like he was well liked, as I said earlier. But there are little things that I find quite interesting. Like, apparently Potter had asked a member of the team, what do the players think of me? Or for instance, in the game against Aston Villa, he spent all week training Trevor Chalobah to play in this back 3 to the point where he thought he was going to be starting. And on the day, he chose Reece James to play right centre back, and situations like that. Do you think they show a guy who in the moment was just thinking, this isn't about my long-term future now, it's now about trying to win these games, taking one game at a time and kind of trying to keep his job?
Well, I'm sure that was something that he thought about more and more as time went on. Like McCubb says, the moments that you see him behaving in what seems like an out of character way, that's how people behave when they are a little bit desperate. And of course he's going to want to make a go of this. It was going worse than he could have expected. However, was that the reason that they lost the Villa game? No, it wasn't. As McCubb says, they were overwhelmingly dominant in that game, massively out-created Villa, and Villa were just clinical with the half chances that they got. I don't really think that, training with Trevor Chalobah all week and then not putting him in is really the difference there. I think often in football, people are really resistant to the idea of like a counterfactual. So if you say, this has worked out well, then everyone starts trying to come up with reasons why it's worked out well and why it was always going to work out well. No one wants to think, well, maybe if that had gone another way, then it wouldn't have worked out well. And similarly, when things go badly, all these stories come out and it's like, well, it was written in the stars. Like the moment that he asked, what do the players think of me? Obviously, he was going to lose his job. I don't know. I just think that might be something that a manager does, where they want to make sure that they've got the guys on side, or it might have been more specific than that. He might have been thinking about training sessions, or who knows. I don't know. I think that he was, as he was saying before with the Tuchel situation, he was just behind the 8 ball from the start on this. And not just because of, the kind of ex-girlfriend feeling that everybody had about Tuchel leaving, but also because Potter has been generally a slow burn at the places he's gone. At Östersunds, he had time. At Swansea, he had relatively low expectations. At Brighton, in his first season, we heard constant talk about, is he going to lose his job? Is he going to lose his job? And then they started to get good. Well, here he came in the middle of the season. Then in January, he pretty much got half a new squad, and everybody wants to talk about the money as if dumping money into a squad automatically makes it good. That's clearly not the case. We've seen every big team in the Premier League waste a huge fee on a player over the last 5 years. I don't know. I think that that's not really an enviable task. And it was always going to be a bit of a tough one for him. Really, what you'd like to do in that situation, if you were the club, you can't do this because it's going to hurt you, but what you'd really like to say is, it's going to take a while. We're instituting a new style. We've got a new manager. He's coming in the middle of the season. We're also revamping the squad. You might have to expect a bit of temporary pain this season. Well, you can say that behind closed doors to the board. You can say it even to the players, maybe, but you definitely can't say it to the fans. Fans will never accept this year might suck, but it's so we can have a good year next year, the year after, and the year after that. And ultimately it's pressure from the fans that makes these things happen.
One of the big things from the fans that was always said is why they felt quite disappointed is they never saw the Potter ball, the way that Potter wanted his Chelsea side to play, which made it even harder to kind of support him when you're losing and you're still not even seeing improvement. I mean, again, another thing that came out in an article was apparently there were times where this is a coach as well who enjoys teaching players his system and needs that one-on-one time with them to get that. It's quite hard to do, Mikey, when supposedly he had to put an 11-a-side game on with a 9-a-side game on to get all the players involved to the side on another pitch.
Yep.
That's very difficult to then implement what you want your football to be played like and how you get your tactics done.
Yeah, like 100%. I mean, it comes down to it, like that Chelsea's transfer policy has just been absolutely wild under Burley, like, and we do keep on coming back to it, but it does seem to be the root cause of a lot of these problems, you know, like, yeah, how can a manager who generally has, again, like he benefited, I think, from working with very tight-knit groups at like Ostersund's and Brighton, you know, family clubs, you know, whereas, you know, he's plunged into this situation at Chelsea where, yeah, like he's having to look after like 30 players or however big,
40 at times, yeah.
And also implements his philosophy, which classically has taken quite a long time to burn in at the clubs he's been at before, as Pat was saying. Like, so, yeah, it just seems like every bit of logic behind his appointment in the first place didn't marry up with everything else that was going on at the club.
Okay then, Pat, finally, where do you think Graham Potter's future and how do you think he's going to be looked at after this? Do you think this Chelsea kind of 7 months is going to be a black mark next to his name, or do you think really they're going to go, look, he had all these players, he had all this, the World Cup in the middle of it, so on and so forth, all these kind of things around it. Do you think a lot of people still think his reputation is quite high, his stock is quite high, or do you think maybe he might need to drop down a level to then build himself back up?
I think those are kind of compatible points of view.
Okay.
I think he's taken a little bit of a reputational hit, as in he is not going to get an automatic job at another Champions League
so
club,
like for instance,
probably.
Tottenham Hotspur
Except maybe a German club. You could imagine a
Okay.
German club taking a little risk on him. That would be potentially interesting. But Tottenham are a bit of a weird one, but they're the best possible club that you could imagine coming in for him. I think, you know, the best calibre of side. I imagine that he will do a sort of mid-table rehabilitation like Brendan Rodgers, you know, go and take charge of an interesting team in the middle of the league who have a good recruitment strategy, who maybe are fairly similar to Brighton. So, for instance, say Spurs went and got Thomas Frank, Brentford would be an interesting landing spot for Potter. Other than that, I find it hard to imagine a team much more ambitious than that taking him on. But I think that's quite a good level, and I think that's maybe what you want at this point, and maybe you get your chance at another big side in another few years. He's already apparently turned down an approach from Leicester. I suspect that that's because of where they are in the season and the kind of pressures on them. But if they stay up, you could imagine them maybe going back and having a talk with him this summer. That would be kind of interesting to me. So I don't know. I don't think Potter will be short of suitors. I think that there will be a lot of interesting jobs for him to choose from. Will they be the absolute top table? No. But will they be good enough to make the most of his talents and potentially a good showcase as he learns, maybe goes through a Conference League campaign or something and really kind of kits himself out as a potential candidate for another big job in future? I think those would all make a lot of sense. And we've got to remember, he's a young coach. This guy could spend another 10 years seasoning himself in mid-table Premier League football and then get another move. And what I don't think he is a sort of toxic character in the way that at times Brendan Rodgers has shown himself to be, or maybe more of a divisive character.
Yeah.
I don't think Potter is that. So actually he comes out of this. It's telling that the stories you've told us, you know, coming out about him after this, are not like the stories coming out about Conte, where it's just like, Conte was a nightmare, we were all desperate for him to go. With Potter, it's like, pity it didn't work out, it was never quite the right fit, we wish him well.
Yeah.
That's a good sign.
Well, I think the other thing as well, like, I don't think anybody here could ever blame him as well for going for this opportunity.
No, of course
when
not.
Chelsea come knocking. But there we have it, guys. That is where it all went wrong for Graham Potter at Chelsea. Please let me know what you guys think of his tenure in charge of the Blues. Where do you think his next job may be? What do you make of his 7 months at Stamford Bridge and how it all panned out, I should say. Let me know in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, click on screen right now for some more Football Daily content. And as always, guys, don't forget to like and subscribe.